Welcome to Conscious Conversations, a place where East meets West, a place where conversations and ideas will challenge your minds, expand your consciousness, awaken your heart, and make you think more deeply about yourself and the world.
Welcome to Conscious Conversations. I'm Anthony Profeta, and I'm here with co-host Wes Gordon. How are you today, Wes?
Very good, very good.
Good, always good to be with you and have these talks. It's been a sort of interesting week already because a couple days ago on Monday, I don't know if you got outside to look at the sky.
I did.
But there was a very special celestial event that was happening known as the Great Conjunction, which if any of you haven't heard, I'm sure many of you did already hear about this because it was like news all over social media and everything else. But there was two planets in the sky, the two biggest planets, Jupiter and Saturn, that were coming together. And actually, I've been watching it for months. If you went outside for months, you could see them. And as we got progressed to the 21st, which just happened to be the winter solstice, they were coming closer and closer and closer to one another. Now, of course, Jupiter and Saturn are millions and millions of miles apart. But what was happening is they weren't actually colliding. One was going like behind the other. And so when they got to a point on December 21st, they were so close that they looked like one star in the sky. And if you looked with a telescope or binoculars, you could actually see a slight separation. But with the naked eye, It looked as one. And many astronomers and astrologers and all of that have stated that this was the Christmas star, or the Star of Bethlehem that happened way back in the day, signifying the birth of a special child of Jesus Christ. But if any of you listening or watching are fans of the great psychiatrist Carl Jung, Jung was fascinated by the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, and he wrote a wonderful book called Aion, A-I-O-N. Now, I say it's a great book, but it is a very difficult book to read. If you're not familiar with Jung's theories and synchronicity and all this stuff, you might not be able to just jump into that book without any knowing any back knowledge on Jung. But in his, I believe it was the 6th chapter of that book, Aion, A-I-O-N, means like an eon, like a period of time or an age. And he's talking about changing of ages. And chapter 6, I believe it was chapter 6, he talks about the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn happening over and over and over again throughout history, and how they were the markers of time. Like humans project things into the stars, and the meetings of those planets began to represent changes in humanity and changes in thinking and consciousness. So they would mark a shift. But some people think like the shift is going to happen like overnight, like energies of the planet's just going to change at the snap of a finger. But it always does take a while, usually, for a change of that. In fact, one of the markers was in 1226 when Jupiter and Saturn came together. And they say that was the mark of Europe moving out of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and into the Renaissance. But the conjunction took place in 1226, and the peak of the Renaissance really wasn't until about 60 to 80 years later. So it does take time for those things to happen. But since that started the week with the Christmas star, and since Christmas is 2 days away, we thought that today we'd converse a little bit about Christmas and the holiday, the tradition, the symbolism of it, and, see what we know and have learned about it, and if what we believe is where that all sort of came from. So I'd just like to throw some things out to you, Wes, and our listeners and watchers as well, and see what we might know about them. So the name Christmas, do you know where that might come from?
No.
Really?
Really?
I thought you knew that one. I thought you said that to me once, but it actually comes from Christ's Mass. So what happened was they would celebrate a Mass, and if any of you aren't Christian, a Mass is just like a church service, but it, for Christians, represents the memory of Jesus's death and resurrection. And when they would have a Mass on Christmas, or to celebrate Christ's Mass, the word Christmas actually became joined as Christmas. So Christ's Mass is the Mass of Christ. But how about the word Xmas? Do you know where that one has come from?
No.
A lot of people get like in a bind about this one. They think like people have crossed Christ out of Christmas and they're trying to remove Christ from Christmas and all of that. But that's not actually the case. The X is actually a Greek letter. And it's the first letter of Christ or Christos, which is Chi, and the X is the letter Chi, is pronounced Chi. And then the next letter is Rho. And if you've ever gone into any Christian churches or Catholic churches or anything like that, you might have seen a symbol or a monogram of an X with a P through the middle of the X. And that became the monogram for the name or symbol of Christ. So they took the first letter of the X, the Chi, and the Rho, and that became the initials for Christ. So Xmas isn't actually pronounced Xmas. It's actually pronounced Chimas, and it means Christmas or Christ's Mass again.
Now, is this all due to the Roman Catholic Church's influence and power at the time?
Romans spoke Latin.
Okay.
They did not speak Greek. So the X was used way before that, but yes, it did eventually get adopted by the Roman Catholic Church as the same symbolism. But remember, the language of Rome was Latin, not Greek. But they did, of course, speak that as well, because much of the ancient world did speak Greek. But the use of the X was used before the Catholic Church actually adopted Christianity as its symbol. But there is also reference to Constantine, who was the first great emperor of the Roman Catholic Church, you could say, because he's the one who made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Well, there's this dream that he had of, use this sign and you will conquer, and that's how he won and became a Christian. Some visions say he saw a cross in the sky and then had the whole army paint that on the shield. They won, and so he adopted Christianity as his religion. But some say it was actually the P with the X. So there's a little bit debate on which way that story goes.
Right.
But now another big one is the actual date of Christmas. How did it become December 25th when in the Bible there's really no date given? There's really no reference to it being winter, December. And so why do we celebrate it? Now, there's actually many arguments within Christianity itself, because not all Christians celebrate Christmas on the 25th. But do you have any ideas on how that all came to be, or did you...
I started studying this for myself and got deep into it. And it got very confusing and very seemed things layered on top of other things.
Okay.
Like the Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Really isn't part of the Christ Mass.
No.
It was like a pagan holiday for an evergreen that never dies.
Yep, and we're gonna bring up the symbolism of the Christmas tree too. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I studied the shepherds.
Oh yes.
And the time of year they'd be out there taking care of sheep doesn't correspond to the 25th either.
Right. They said it was be too cold.
And then I lost my 3 wise men because they don't exist in the Bible, and those were like alluded to but not actually represented specifically. Right,
the number. The wise men and the magi was referenced, but there's no number to it just being 3. It could have been 15.
Yeah, and they didn't show up the night he was born. It was like a year later, and they showed up in his house instead of the manger.
Yes.
It says it right there in the book.
Yes.
I was like, well, this is messing my whole Christmas story up like crazy. So... carry on.
So the date of December 25th, there is great debate on why it sort of became that date. Some say like Christianity took over some pagan holidays because there were many festivals that were celebrated in this time of year. In fact, we gave a talk on December being a very sacred time to many different teachings, and it was in our podcast or our radio show called Be the Light. And so how this is a time when many traditions celebrate light. And so which just happened on Monday, the 21st, was a very big day for many traditions because that was the winter solstice. Right. Now, many pagan traditions celebrate that not as the shortest day, which it is, but a rebirth of the sun god, the light coming back to the earth. In fact, not only many pagan traditions, but also the ancient Egyptians also celebrated the solstice as the rebirth of their sun god Ra.
Right.
So it was the rebirth of the sun god, which many people can say, well, easily is understandable on why a celebration of the sun, S-U-N, God, would fall over into a celebration of God's son, S-O-N. And so some say that there's parallel to that, and so it falls into that. Others say it took over the celebration of Yule, which was also celebrated around this time in the northern European countries. And so some say it's just sort of as a parallel to, since they were celebrating Yule, bringing Christmas that time so that they can have more converts and people would easily adapt to this new Christian holiday. Others say it's because of the celebration of the Roman festival Saturnalia, which actually is between December 17th and 23rd, and is to the Roman god Saturn. However, there is great debate on it because there are many references of early Christians actually celebrating a specific festival on March 25th, and that was the Annunciation of Mary. And the Annunciation of Mary is when the angel Gabriel came and said, "You will give birth to a child." And so many early Christians began to celebrate that day, but back way in the early 200 AD, I believe. And so if you just count out 9 months from March 25th, you get December 25th. And so there was a group of early Christians that were celebrating the birth of Jesus on that day because they just continued out 9 months from when they were celebrating the Annunciation. And because it was referenced in archaeological texts and all this stuff in early 200 AD, some say then it couldn't be in conjunction with Yule, because the first Yule time the word Yule is used is actually the 300s, 100 years later. And there was another festival called Sol Invictus that began by the Emperor Aurelius, which is the celebration of the unconquered or the invincible sun, which some say, well, again, Christianity just adopted that, but he didn't adopt that until 274. So again, there is debate on whether Christianity just overtook sort of pagan holidays or if they were really celebrating this day earlier than that because of March 25th. But I think we need to take a break here, and then we'll come back and start talking about some more symbolism of Christmas and some of its traditions right after these messages, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Conscious Conversations. I'm Anthony Profeta, and I'm here with Wes Gordon, and we're having a conversation about Christmas, the history of Christmas, some of its symbolism, where all these traditions sort of arose from. And we were sort of talking about the date of Christmas, and Wes, you brought up the three wise men and how they really doesn't say that there's three, but it does say that there's these magi or wise men coming.
There's three gifts. That's how they translated a lot of it over.
Okay, so the three gifts came from three different wise men. That's how they get three.
Yeah, I was playing with that.
Okay.
Actually, three shepherds showed up, but they don't sell too good. Because they did show up. At
the birth.
Yes.
Right, the wise men say later. In fact, if you go to Carl Jung, again, referencing his book Ion, he says that the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn took place on the 7 BC, which would signal the birth of Christ if they were following that star. But also that, according to the Bible, he was born prior to the death of Herod. And so his death took place in 4 BC. So that would say that he was possibly born around that time of 7 to 4. And then maybe the wise men showed up somewhere in between that point, because it doesn't actually say they arrived at his actual birth. Like you said, they arrived, and according to the scriptures, they arrived at a house.
Right, not a manger.
Not a manger. And another reason why I'm bringing up the wise men right now is because not all Christians celebrate Christmas on the 25th. Do you know the other date that some Orthodox Christians... No? They actually celebrated on January 6th or 7th.
Really?
In celebration of what was known as the Epiphany, because now the Epiphany today sort of has become related to the day that the wise men showed up. And so they came bearing gifts. And so the Orthodox and Coptic Christians, many of them celebrate Christmas and exchange gifts on the day they celebrate the wise men arriving. Gotcha. So they actually celebrate Christmas on that day, not December 25th. However, earlier, the Epiphany was not tied to the wise men. The Epiphany was actually a celebration of Jesus's baptism in the Jordan River by John. And Epiphany actually means like a revelation, like I had an epiphany. Well, what the revelation or the Epiphany celebrated was Jesus's revelation after baptism as being the Son of God. Because prior to that, the dove didn't descend and God didn't say, this is my beloved son. So that day, they would say, is more important than actually Jesus' birthday, because that was the day he was revealed to be God's son and then went out and began his ministry. So early Christians celebrated the Epiphany as a celebration of that day, not the three wise men.
Yeah, pulling this stuff all together, I get a sense of false advertisement going on here about how this holiday goes. I even read as so far as that the gift thing didn't happen till way back in certain years. At the beginning of Christmas, it wasn't about giving gifts. It was about connecting as family and
a celebration of the life or the birth of Jesus. Right. There wasn't any exchanging of the presents.
Wonder why that came about. Marketing?
To make people spend money and get the economy going. No, I don't know. But
we would never do that.
There was a tradition, though, with the wise men, like I said, the Epiphany, where Eastern Christians would give a gift because the wise men gave gifts.
I heard they were actually astrologers, too.
Correct. Supposedly, they were Zoroastrian astrologers, sky watchers. The Magi were from the ancient Persian religion of Zoroastrianism. And another reference of why they were probably Persian astrologers is because gifts that Persians would give to a divine being or something like that would be gold and incense. And you can go through the Bible itself and find multiple references to this.
Right.
So when Daniel was able to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then Nebuchadnezzar realized, oh my God, the God speak to you and your God is the God, he gave him gold and incense. Right. As a gift for his revelation of telling what the dream was.
When I was studying that, it said that the frankincense, myrrh, and gold were actually gifts that were referenced to a king.
Right.
So they were figuring that's possibly why they said those specific gifts.
Ones.
So Christ was going to be a king.
Okay.
I had another chink taken out of my Christmas fantasy, though, as I discovered that they didn't ride camels.
Right. They were used for transport.
Yeah, camels were packed animals, and they actually at that time, if this is true, rode horses.
Oh, I don't know.
So I don't see any horses in my Christmas scene. So I'm like, well, wait a minute, here we go again.
Well, now that you bring up the Christmas scene, which is probably one of the most iconic, symbols of the Christmas season, the manger, the creche, as some people call it, with Mary, Joseph, and Jesus all in this wooden manger with all these animals around them. Do you know how that actually got started? Because that's not actually referenced per se in the Bible either. The word that is referenced on where he was laid was in a phate in Greek. The word in Greek is phate, which means like a trough.
Yeah.
And so it might be a ledge in a room where they would lay hay or feed for a traveler's animals, and the animals would go into this place and they could eat there. So he was laid in something like that. But how the whole manger scene came to form is, do you know how that first started?
No.
Okay, there was a saint in Italy, a very well-known saint. His name is Saint Francis. And supposedly the whole idea of the manger scene is attributed to him, because on one of his retreats or sabbaticals, he actually went to the Holy Land, and he sort of, according to their story, had a vision of, and he was very connected to the baby Jesus, that when he came back, after seeing the supposed place where Jesus was born,
right,
he, during Christmas time, created the scene of a manger, of the wooden manger stall with the baby Jesus, the family, and brought sheep and donkeys and all of this there because he wanted people to reference the not, palace-like place that this child was born,
right,
but how humble the place he was, right, and how his infancy was in a place that was just as regular as any place else.
Right.
And also it was a sign to the other people in Italy at the time, the very wealthy, of the poverty that this child was born into.
Makes sense.
And so St. Francis was the first to actually institute that whole image of what might be one of the most iconic images of the Christian season, the whole manger scene. And then it spread throughout many of the Christian churches, and many other churches would begin building these nativity scenes.
Well, that's also where a lot of literature defines the actual dates are off, because they take the festivals that they were supposed to be attending.
Right.
That's the reason there was no room at the inn, which that part seems to be factually true.
Right.
And that's why he was supposedly out in a manger, because the city was overtaken at this time of year, where there was only so many hundred thousands of people there. This year there'd be over 1 million people gathering, and people had already taken all the places that you could stay overnight. So
Right.
yeah, that plays out, but that throws the date off.
It does throw the date off. Some say it's actually September, October,
Yeah.
because that would be the festival of Sukkot. And so some say it might be at that time. But now the last thing we might reference is the iconic Christmas tree. So do you have any idea of how that might all have come to form?
Well, I was told from the church I grew up in that
Right.
was a pagan holiday, a pagan ritual.
Many say it was.
Worshiping a tree that supposedly never dies, so it's everlasting. It's an evergreen.
Yes, immortality,
Yes.
according to many pagan
Yeah.
and ancient traditions.
But you tell, when I was in a Christian church, that I somehow got twisted into a pagan worship. That's like telling me I'm part devil. The whole thing fell apart. It's like, wait a minute, that can't be.
Right.
Well,
Well,
so they actually had Christmas without trees.
oh, yeah, I know many Christians that have Christmas without trees. But yes, so supposedly it did come from Yule and Yule log and other sort of pagan, sort of so-called pagan practices. But yes, the first Christmas trees, they say, originated in Germany. And some say the first way it came about was from St. Boniface. There's a story of the falling of Thor's oak, because according to Germans, some of them worshipped the god Thor, who lived in an oak tree. So St. Boniface went to chop down this oak tree, and when the wind blew it over, there was an evergreen, a small remnant of an evergreen in the middle of the oak tree, which to him was a symbol of God or Christ being in our hearts, within us. So then the Christmas tree arose from that. But there's also, in Western Germany, there was the Festival of Adam and Eve, in which happened on the December 24th. In which they would take a tree, an evergreen tree, and decorate it with apples, symbolizing the tree in the Garden of Eden. And it was a symbol of the celebration of Adam and Eve. And so that sort of got brought over into the Christmas tree. And then it began to spread throughout Europe, some say with Prince Albert and his and Queen Victoria of England, and then it began to spread and throughout the rest of Europe and then into America. And some say the first one was in Worcester, a small city located in northern Ohio, and some say that is where the first Christmas tree actually was.
Wow.
So that's just a little of the symbolism of Christianity. We appreciate of Christmas and its Christian traditions, and so we thank you all. We appreciate you all listening, and we hope you have a very blessed, happy holiday season, whatever it is you're celebrating, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. Have a great, blessed day, and Merry Christmas.